Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs. I'm the founder and CEO of Go Cloud Careers, and I'm excited to host Aviatrix today. And today we're going to talk about hybrid multi-cloud and why in many cases that's actually the future of our cloud architectures. I'm joined by Bryan Ashley, who's a VP at Aviatrix in product marketing. I'm here with Woody Woodworth, who's a director of solution strategy at Aviatrix. And I'm also here with our chief technology officer, Mark Milonovich. So today we're going to talk about why the future is hybrid multi-cloud and in many cloud architectures. You know, the statistics are out. 98% of organizations use more than one cloud. And we're also in the world of cloud repatriation, and many companies are leaving the cloud as they're still going to the cloud. And the key is the cloud is one of the best forms of digital transformation out there if it's absolutely used properly. If we look at the people, the processes, and the technology and how to solve business problems, then the cloud is the best thing that's out there. But many people migrated to the cloud for the wrong reasons. When they went to the cloud, they noticed their costs went up 2 to 3 times over their data center costs. And that brings us to this cloud repatriation. At the same time, the cloud is the most agile and scalable solution in the world. It enables businesses to deploy new applications and new services at a greater velocity, enhancing their business performance. And that's why we end up in the hybrid multi-cloud world, because the hybrid cloud, that private cloud, give us the best speed, the greatest security, the best performance, and often at a lower cost. But the agility of the public cloud is so great. So that's why we're going to be having this discussion. So from the folks at Aviatrix, what's your experience with customers going to these multi-cloud architectures or hybrid multi-cloud architectures?
I think for me, it's been an interesting journey to watch customers go through this over the last 5 or 6 years. Cloud was the promise of endless compute and storage, and so the ability to enable global reach or bring new products to market, leverage some of these cloud native tool sets was just so appealing that everybody flocked to the cloud. Fast forward a couple of years, COVID hits. We all have to adjust accordingly. The cloud was great. Folks could work from home. They could reconnect to systems. It did force some organizations to accelerate their cloud strategy in a lot of different ways. But now, especially as we look at this year and last year, the rooster has sort of come back home from a cloud cost perspective. One of the things that I think took a lot of organizations time to get used to was the metered nature of cloud, and that metered consumption model is just different from what we're used to in the on-prem world. You have to understand how you're using your resources, what's spun up all the time, and when to spend those down so that you can optimize those cloud compute costs. And people have done a pretty good job of that over the years from a compute perspective. Still some work to be done around some of the networking components, because that meter is running as well when we look at it from a data perspective. But it's a maturing that's happening across these organizations. Some of that, to your point, Mike, is the realization that, okay, I need to look at different cloud providers for cost benefits or where those services run a little bit better. Some of them are re-inspecting what actually needs to go inside of cloud and say, you know what, actually, this makes a whole lot more sense. We're never going to refactor it, or it's just too hard to deal with. We need to keep that, repatriate that back down into an on-prem data center. So it's been interesting to see, certain technologies like networking be upended after decades of that kind of being the same across all verticals. Us having, us old networking guys having to relearn some new tricks in how cloud networking works. But it's when you can find the right marriage of that, we've seen customers be able to really, I hate to use the buzzwords, digitally transform, but they're doing just that. Getting there, though, is not an easy task. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of teams that used to be siloed, now coming together. Network and security have to be sort of hand in glove in a lot of different ways. So it's a maturing of all of the business units within the organizations to really see this be effective.
Yeah, I think you hit on something. It's putting these teams together, networking, security. So, I hate to say, but I'm probably one of the older networking people that are out there. I started working in networking with the ISDN cloud and then the frame relay cloud. And here's the key: networking it was here, security was here, applications were here, and we were kind of all divorced from the business itself. We were just making tech in a vacuum. And then, we've got to get to the point where the business needs and the business requirements actually drive the architectures instead of the tech the other way around. And we need all those teams together. I'm in complete agreement with you that if you've got networking divorced from security, you're going to have network problems and security problems. But really, what's the goal? Helping our clients and helping improve their business. So I totally agree with you there. And I think you made some really good points. And yeah, the networking thing is kind of interesting. For those of us that have been in networking for a long time, we had a lot of features and functionality that we're used to. I mean, we really did. I mean, I noticed it was about a year ago that AWS, and they're a great cloud, produced a new press release. They now allow IPsec over a direct connection. And, thinking about it, I put IPsec over a direct connection back in 1998. And the cloud is really catching up, which is one of the reasons I really like having you guys here. You guys have some very interesting solutions to enable the cloud and to enable cloud networking to honestly be like modern networking as opposed to 1998 to 1999 networking, which is typically what we have in the cloud, which is why we networking people are trying to adapt to go back to, oh, wait, I remember what it was like when we could only have this many routes in a router. I remember what this is like. So that's pretty interesting. So I actually think multi-cloud is going to grow for the following reasons. Every reason you talked about, but also that not putting all the eggs in a single basket. It reminds me, it's very reminiscent of the first days when I worked for MCI WorldCom, and the organizations had their primary network on, say, frame relay, and the backup network was on ISDN, so there were two separate networks. And then we realized that, wait, MCI WorldCom might have a catastrophic outage, so now we've got a link on AT&T, and now we have a link on Verizon, and we kind of did that. So, to me, that's multi-cloud. It's the same multi-cloud as we've been doing for the last couple of decades, just with telecom stuff, and now it's with data center stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think early days, we sort of got blinded by the power of some of these big CSPs, and we realized, and look, I won't pick on any CSP in particular. It affects them all, but they are fallible. They can experience outages just like we experience outages in the on-prem world. And oftentimes, it can be truly detrimental to your business critical applications and the way in which you interact with your customers. And so, Mike, I totally agree with you. 4 or 5 years ago, maybe we weren't quite sure what multi-cloud was going to look like. Was this some level of redundancy? Maybe it's more pilot light than active standby. It's very much been a shift where customers are starting to maybe not spread a single workload across multiple clouds, but for sure build backups and warm, if not hot, standbys of some of these critical applications cross cloud.
Yeah, so Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, please, Woody.
Going back to your original question, there's another facet to that which we should explore here, because it weaves into everything we've already said, which is, what do we see in multi-cloud now? What are some of the big differences that customers and enterprises are experiencing in a multi-cloud journey versus just a single hybrid journey to one cloud? And that is the rise of the network kind of in the mind of the business executive. Networking used to be a bit like plumbing, right? You depended on it, you needed it, you didn't see it, you didn't feel it, unless you really had to, in which case it was a 5-alarm fire. Networking is very much different now with cloud, and then compounded by multi-cloud because it's very intimately connected to the application in terms of what that application needs to survive and to prosper. And so that's, I think, a forcing function for all these different people to come together, security people, DevOps people, networking people, because you can't really have a successful application in the cloud unless you have a network that's intelligently architected around it. And then what is happening is that as people move into other clouds, they are realizing that the patterns for adoption are very different between them. So back in traditional data center days, all data centers were running something in their core that was either Cisco or Cisco-like, maybe Juniper or Arista. Getting those two systems to interoperate didn't take a lot of work. They were all ISO compliant. They shared the same standards. They were just facsimiles of each other in terms of their networking and routing stacks. Cloud is a massive departure from that idea. Maybe it has BGP capability. If it does, it's going to be a sliver of what a Cisco core would have. It's going to be a subset of things. And then that difference is going to be pronounced across multiple cloud stacks. So it's like trying to, connect, say, a traditional data center with a token ring network, with a FIDI network. It's like these wildly different networks. And that difference is what causes a lot of frustration and slowness to business adoption. So the Aviatrix's approach is to come in and say, go with a uniform network that has enterprise-like qualities, that has enterprise-like observability and control like you have in the data center, to level the playing field, to neutralize that difference, and to thus gain much faster agility for your business, but also to be able to more effectively help these people collaborate that we discussed.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a point again that Bryan brought up on a little bit early in regards to the uncertain times that we went through a few years ago. And it seems like a lot of engineers just gravitated towards what they were familiar with. And that tended to be a single cloud provider. And being put under pressure, it's understandable. We'll try to immediately accommodate our bosses, our chief executives on the need that our company needs. Some companies went through a transition of having all of a sudden nobody working from home to having thousands of people having to work from home and having to migrate these different workloads. So we have to think about it that at that point in time, we were all just being kind of rushed into what it means to have our workloads on the cloud. And with that, mistakes can be made. So as with anything, we go through these ebb and flows and phases as how we adopt the technology, and eventually we have use cases that we can learn from. And that's where I personally believe where multi-cloud and hybrid multi-cloud is going to continually grow, because we now find out the value in having our workloads distributed across these different environments. And then, as Woody mentioned, with hopefully a platform that allows us to manage all these different cloud service providers.
Yeah, and I think Woody brought up a really interesting point. So many people don't even think about networking. It's an afterthought. We used to be the plumbers. And I have a lot of people, because we train people to be cloud architects and they work everywhere. And they come to me and they're like, Mike, I got to learn to code. And I said, no, you're going to be designing a solution, presenting a solution, selling a solution, negotiating a solution, managing stakeholders, but you better know networking. And they say, why networking? And I say, if the network doesn't work, your entire architecture will fall apart, and it's instantly. And we may not need to code, but we need to understand BGP and IP addressing and subnetting and supernetting and the WAN technologies. And because that's really the center of all of it. So, Woody, I'm 100% agree with you. I'm also in agreement with you that, yes, we connect a Cisco router to a Juniper router, and pretty much it's no big deal. We run the same OSPF or ISIS, the same BGP, the same MPLS things, and it's great. And now we get to the cloud, and we're limited to, say, 100 routes via BGP, which, you think about it, and it's like, okay, I've got 900,000 routes on this router coming in from one ISP, and now I've got 100. And, having better routing and somebody coming in. So maybe you can talk about how you guys work with multi-cloud networking and how you mitigate some of those, cloud challenges that we would normally deal with if we were just going to try and work with a cloud native networking tool.
Sure. Yeah. I think, fundamentally, one of the areas where Aviatrix is different is we started in cloud. We didn't have on-prem software that was ported up. So from the beginning, we recognized that we had to understand how cloud works, right? We've already talked about, sort of the layers of the OSI model changing a bit when we get into cloud, right? ARP looks a whole lot different. Yep. Layer one's definitely abstracted from us. But that changes the behavior of how packets are forwarded inside of cloud or not. So I think, by having that upbringing, we started, as a lot of people do, in AWS. This was back in 2014 when we began, and then built what became essentially the TGW for AWS. And so in order to do that successfully, we had to understand the mechanics of cloud. What we have found as we've matured in cloud is that, as we go into extend that into other clouds, obviously, as we've discussed, the rules changed. But the value we've been able to deliver to customers is understanding fundamentally how that native construct or fabric works, and then bridging the gap to what the consumer is looking for. How did it work in the on-prem world, and what are they expecting? And so by being able to do both, we can kind of give customers the best of both worlds. We can allow seamlessly the integration of those native services where it makes sense to do so, but we can also provide granularly an insertion of an overlay that provides unification and a similar interaction, be it in usability or in functional limitations, that it really enables someone to consume the service relatively easily. The skills gap problem is very, very real for a lot of customers that are out there. The cloud is growing like crazy, but there's not endless budget to grow teams, much less get and retain experts in all of these different cloud providers.
Yeah.
So being able to empower teams, small teams, to do more and allow the business to expand in other clouds and leverage those native cloud services where appropriately, but augment them or extend that functionality when they run into limitations is huge, right? And so our platform is really aimed at delivering that. And I think that's sort of the core fundamental aspect of how we grew up. Now, what's been interesting in sort of the evolution of this, and I think, Mike, this resonated with me when you were talking about, plugging a Cisco into a Juniper and you're running BGP or ISIS, right?
Yeah.
That's good. The problem is in cloud, we have additional dimensions that we never even had in the on-prem world. Latency is a whole different ballgame in cloud, right? We're not in the four walls of a data center anymore. And suddenly, every piece of data I send across a wire costs me money. So now I've got to figure out, okay, wait, well, how do I bring in these other elements from a networking perspective? And so I think that has also been kind of a piece of normalization that we've been able to add into our platform, in addition to the standard networking elements that, again, have allowed our customers to really start to stay agile in the cloud, but maintain kind of what they know is important from the on-prem world, a consistent architecture and a consistent approach.
Yeah, and that's what's lacking in the cloud is that consistent architecture, that consistent networking thing, those networking standards. The latency is a big problem. The lack of QoS is a problem. The lack of being able to rate limit things in case you got a worm or a virus is a problem. So being able to provide tools like that really opens it up. And I think you keyed on something else. Mark and I are happy to get all kinds of geeky, and deal with, peering with 10 ISPs and creating an ISIS backbone with label switching and RSVP signal tunnels. And for Mark and I, that's like heaven, and probably for some of you guys as well. But the problem is that's an expensive skill for a company to find. And it's a rare skill. When you're dealing at that level, there may be 10,000 people in the entire world that can actually do it. And the rest is, how do you find these people? So I like that you create that overlay network. And I like that you make it much simpler. So companies don't need 15 CCIEs on staff. They can probably get away with a person that can do a few other things at the same time, and have people that can get the job done instead of having just siloed networking teams.
Yeah, and I think Bryan may have mentioned this, but the other part that Aviatrix is really helpful with is supplying an input signal for automation and a consistent input signal for automation, so that you can help get up to speed very quickly with your application developers on the infrastructure side. So we speak Terraform. We also support Crossplane to a certain degree. And so it helps you consolidate your Terraform CI/CD playbook to be inclusive of infrastructure things, networking and security things, which helps networking and security professionals work more closely with developers and DevOps people, but also helps all these pieces kind of move as one. Which is very nice, because in a multi-cloud world, trying to get all of your network to move as one can be, a mighty task. And so that part about Aviatrix, we've noticed a lot of customer satisfaction with. When we talk to customers for feedback, that's part of what we do on Bryan's team, right? We go to customers and say, what do you love? What don't you love? How can we make the product better? We get a lot of good feedback. But one of the feedback is, I love your automation. So we'll ask them, why are you using Aviatrix for your multi-cloud backbone? You could just do that same thing with Cisco or an SD-WAN mesh. And they'll say, because you guys automate everything. And so I think that's been a profound realization on our side that automation is so key and important to the industry. So we're definitely going to continue to further that development.
And I like that, but I really like that where you talked about the development getting closer with the networking piece.
Yeah.
Because, most of my networking career, which is sadly about 30 years now, anytime you had the Linux team or the development team lead a project, it would fall apart on the infrastructure side. Anytime you had the infrastructure people lead a project, the infrastructure would work, but it necessarily wouldn't provide the business value they need. So by being able to cut down some of those barriers and get the teams working together and speak a more common language, the outcomes I feel should be better. And that's the key to automation. We've got to do it. We have to make sure we know it before we automate it.
Yeah.
Because if we automate it wrong, we can break things. But if we can automate it right, in terms of productivity, it's incredible. Disaster recovery is kind of incredible too. And the speed of agility of new deployments and new applications, it's incredible. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish this session up on hybrid multi-cloud?
Just that if you are in a single cloud, Aviatrix, of course, supports you and condones you and is still valuable to you. I will say to those folks that are listening that if you are in a single cloud, there is a chance in the future that you won't be in a single cloud. There will be other forcing functions that can cause your business to develop and organically grow into other clouds. So it's not also a bad idea, no matter what tool set or mindset you're in, to future-proof yourself a little bit. There can be mergers and acquisitions. There can be unexpected outages. There can be a new business division that comes online that needs a critical new function that's just not available in your primary cloud. So it's always good to have a strategy in place, even if today you're not a multi-cloud customer.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Woody. We sort of have a saying here, or at least a lot of the traditional networking guys, you're single cloud until the moment that you're not, right? And it could be a golf course decision that's made that suddenly you've been told that you're now moving everything over into another cloud. Could be a merger and acquisition, but in either case, right, even large deployments can often have very serious architectural challenges even within a single cloud. Right? There's just native challenges at scale in certain instances. So from an Aviatrix Solutions perspective, we've been fortunate enough to see it all, from big and small to single cloud to very large multi-cloud, 4+1 strategies, 5+1 strategies. And so the platform and the advanced overlay networking and network security provides a lot of solutions for those customers facing those challenges. So we would love to engage and help you out if you're one of them.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. Here we have Aviatrix solving networking problems, solving cloud problems. So for me, I'm not married to any technology. I'm married to making my customers more successful. And all these technology tools give us the opportunity to make our clients more successful. And Aviatrix is an extremely good tool set. We'll have a couple more discussions with Aviatrix for you and our audience because they've got a lot that I think you'll be very interested in to do to help either a single cloud, a hybrid multi-cloud, and help our clients be more successful. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Woody, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.